My grandson called me in the middle of the night. "Grandma, I'm at the police station. My stepfather kicked me out, and now he's saying I assaulted him." And they believed him. When I arrived at the station, the officer on duty froze and, stammering, said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." The shrill ring of my phone jarred me from sleep at 1:47 a.m. In the disorienting moment between dreams and wakefulness, my first thought was that it must be an emergency. At my age, late-night calls rarely bring good news. "Hello?" My voice was rough with sleep as I fumbled to turn on the bedside lamp. "Grandma?" The voice on the other end was tight with fear, immediately recognizable as my 16-year-old grandson. "Tyler?" I sat up straight, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "I'm at the police station in Portland." His words tumbled out, strained and desperate. "Robert kicked me out of the house, and now he's telling the police I attacked him. They're treating me like I'm some kind of criminal. Mom's at work, and I didn't know who else to call." The mention of Robert, my former daughter-in-law's new boyfriend of barely 4 months, sent a wave of cold dread through me. I'd never met the man, but Tyler's reluctant comments over the past few weeks had painted a picture of someone who used his position as a municipal guard to throw his weight around. "Which police station?" I asked, already swinging my legs over the side of the bed, my mind shifting into the focused clarity I'd developed during 30 years on the federal bench. "Tell me exactly what happened." "The Central Precinct on Middle Street," he replied. "Robert and I got into an argument after Mom left for her night shift. He found me talking to you on the phone earlier and completely lost it. Said I wasn't allowed to contact you without his permission." My jaw tightened at this. Tyler had been calling me regularly since my son Michael died 7 years ago. Those calls had become our ritual, our way of maintaining the connection that death had threatened to sever. "He grabbed my phone," Tyler continued, his voice cracking slightly. "When he saw I'd been recording some of the stuff he's been saying to me, he went ballistic, started throwing my things outside, told me to get out. When I said I had nowhere to go, he tried to physically push me out the door. I just pulled away from him, and he tripped and hit the door frame. And now he's claiming assault," I concluded, hearing the familiar pattern. I'd seen this scenario play out in my courtroom too many times to count. Someone with authority manufacturing charges against a more vulnerable person. "His police buddies showed up and didn't even listen to me," Tyler said bitterly. "They just took his word for everything." "I'm coming right now," I told him, already pulling clothes from my dresser. "It'll take me about 2 hours to drive up. Don't say anything else to anyone until I get there. If they try to question you, politely tell them you're waiting for your grandmother." "Okay," he whispered, sounding younger than his 16 years. "Please hurry, Grandma." As I hung up, the practiced calm I'd maintained for Tyler's benefit gave way to a cold anger. In the 7 years since Michael's death, I'd done everything possible to support Jennifer in raising my grandson. I'd never interfered in her relationships, even when I had reservations. But this was crossing a line I couldn't ignore. The drive from Boston to Portland normally took just under 2 hours, but at that hour with empty highways, I made it in 1 hour and 40 minutes. The familiar weight of responsibility settled over me as I drove, memories of my years as Judge Margaret Sullivan providing a framework for what needed to be done. I'd spent 3 decades ensuring that power wasn't abused in my courtroom. I wouldn't stand by while it was abused against my grandson. The Portland police station was brightly lit against the 3:30 a.m. darkness, an imposing brick building that had probably seemed impressive once, but now looked tired and institutional. I parked in the visitor lot and took a moment to center myself, adjusting my clothing, a simple black pantsuit I kept ready for emergencies, and squaring my shoulders. The desk sergeant looked up as I entered, his expression a mixture of boredom and mild curiosity at seeing a well-dressed older woman arriving at this hour. "I'm here for Tyler Sullivan," I announced, my voice carrying the same authoritative tone I'd used to quiet unruly attorneys. "My grandson was brought in earlier this evening." The sergeant tapped at his computer. "Sullivan? Yes, he's being held pending juvenile charges, domestic disturbance and assault. Are you his legal guardian?" "I'm his grandmother, Margaret Sullivan," I replied evenly. "I'd like to see him immediately." "I'll need to check with the processing officer," he said, reaching for his phone. "Officer Peterson is handling the case." While he made the call, I studied the station. Not much different from the many police departments I'd interacted with during my career. The same uncomfortable plastic chairs, the same faded posters about community policing, the same subtle indicators of a system where connections mattered more than facts. A door to the side opened, and a man in his mid-30s emerged. Officer Peterson, I presumed, from the way he approached with clipboard in hand and an air of bureaucratic authority. Mrs. Sullivan, I understand you're here about the juvenile involved in the assault on Officer Miller, he began, his tone suggesting this was a routine matter hardly worth disturbing his night shift. That's Judge Sullivan, I corrected him calmly. Federal Judge Margaret Sullivan, retired from the First Circuit Court of Appeals, and I'm here about my grandson, who I understand has been accused by a man he's known for less than 4 months. With no witnesses present, the change was immediate and striking. Officer Peterson's posture stiffened, his eyes widened slightly, and his grip on the clipboard tightened enough to whiten his knuckles. Recognition flashed across his face, the kind that comes when a name from legal textbooks or departmental warnings suddenly materializes in human form. I'm sorry. I didn't know, he stammered, his previous confidence evaporating. The paperwork didn't indicate any connection to... Officer Miller didn't mention that the juvenile was related to... I imagine there are quite a few things Officer Miller failed to mention, I replied. Now, I'd like to see my grandson immediately, and then we can discuss why you chose to accept the uncorroborated accusation of one of your colleagues against a minor without proper investigation. As he hurried to comply, I maintained my composed exterior, but inside, a cold certainty was forming. Someone had tried to use the system I'd served faithfully for 30 years against my grandson, and they were about to learn exactly why that had been a grave mistake. Officer Peterson led me through a security door into the station's interior, his earlier confidence replaced by a nervous energy that manifested in quick glances and unnecessary commentary about the facility. I let him ramble, observing the subtle shift in how other officers regarded us as we passed, their curious eyes following the suddenly deferential Peterson and the straight-backed woman who had caused such a change in his demeanor. Tyler's in our juvenile holding area, Peterson explained, gesturing down a corridor. It's not technically a cell, more of a supervised waiting space. I'm familiar with how juvenile detention works, officer, I replied evenly. I've sentenced young offenders to such facilities when circumstances warranted it. I've also dismissed cases when police work was sloppy or motivated by personal connection rather than evidence. He swallowed visibly at that, stopping before a door with a small observation window. Through it, I could see Tyler sitting alone at a table, his posture defeated, one hand touching the side of his face where a reddish mark was visible even from this distance. Has he received medical attention for that injury? I asked sharply. He didn't request any medical. He's 16, Officer Peterson, a minor in custody. The responsibility for ensuring his well-being lies with your department, not with a frightened teenager's ability to formally request assistance. Peterson fumbled with his keys. I'll have someone from medical check him right away. After I speak with him, privately. He hesitated. Department protocol requires supervision for all. Officer, I cut him off, my voice dropping to the quiet, precise tone that had silenced countless courtrooms. I spent 30 years sending people to federal prison for civil rights violations and abuse of power. Would you like to explain to your captain why you denied a minor access to his legal representative? You're his legal representative? For the moment, I'm the only advocate he has. Open the door, please. He complied, and I entered the room to find Tyler rising quickly to his feet, relief washing over his face. Grandma, he exclaimed, his composure cracking. In 3 steps, I had crossed the room and embraced him, feeling the slight tremor in his body that betrayed his fear despite his attempts to appear strong. Are you all right? I asked, drawing back to examine the mark on his face. I'm okay, he insisted, though the way his eyes darted toward Peterson suggested otherwise. We'll speak privately, I told him, turning back to the officer who hovered uncertainly in the doorway. Officer Peterson was just leaving to arrange for medical attention and to gather the complete case file for my review. Once the door closed behind the reluctant officer, Tyler's shoulders slumped. I didn't do what they're saying, Grandma. I swear. I know, I assured him, guiding him back to sit down. Now tell me everything from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. Tyler's account flowed more freely now that we were alone. He described how Jennifer had been working night shifts 3 times a week since they'd moved in with Robert, leaving the 2 of them alone in the house. Robert, he explained, had been increasingly controlling, establishing rules that seemed designed to isolate Tyler from his friends and family back in Boston. He's been reading my texts, Tyler continued, monitoring who I talk to. Last week he told Mom that my calls with you were excessive and that I was too dependent on my grandmother. Mom just said we should try to make things work with him. My heart ached for both of them. Tyler, caught in an impossible situation, and Jennifer, so desperate for stability after Michael's death that she couldn't see the control tactics for what they were. Tonight, he found me on the phone with you and just lost it, Tyler explained. Said I was undermining his authority in his own house. When he grabbed for my phone, I pulled back, and he saw I'd been recording some of the stuff he's been saying. The recordings, I said, suddenly alert to their importance. Where is your phone now? Robert has it. When his police friends showed up, he told them it was evidence of me planning to attack him. They just took his word for everything. Before I could respond, the door opened and a middle-aged woman in medical scrubs entered, followed by Peterson. This is Janet from medical, Peterson announced, nervously shifting his weight. And, Captain Reynolds just arrived. She'd like to speak with you, Judge Sullivan. That surprised me. The precinct captain coming in at nearly 4 a.m. was unusual and suggested that word of my presence had traveled quickly. Tyler needs medical attention first, I stated firmly. Then I want copies of all reports filed regarding this incident, including any statements from Officer Miller, and I want to know exactly what charges are being considered. Yes, ma'am, Peterson replied, his earlier authoritative demeanor completely evaporated. The captain asked to meet you in her office once the medical evaluation is complete. As the medical technician examined Tyler's face, noting the distinct finger marks that suggested a slap rather than defensive action on Robert's part, I maintained a calm exterior while my mind worked through the legal strategy. My priority was getting Tyler released into my custody, but I had no intention of letting Robert's false accusations go unchallenged. 20 minutes later, with Tyler's injury documented and photographed, I followed Peterson to Captain Reynolds' office. I remembered to walk slowly, maintaining my dignified pace rather than hurrying as my concern for Tyler urged me to do. Perception mattered in these situations, and I needed to project the same unflappable authority that had served me well on the bench. Captain Diane Reynolds stood as we entered, extending her hand. Judge Sullivan, I apologize for meeting under these circumstances. Her grip was firm, her gaze direct. I recognized in her the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had earned her position through competence rather than connections. I appreciate you coming in at this hour, Captain, I responded, though I'm concerned about why my grandson is being held based on an unsubstantiated accusation. Reynolds gestured for me to sit, then dismissed Peterson with a nod. When the door closed behind him, her professional facade softened slightly. I know who you are, Judge Sullivan. Your reputation for fairness and integrity is well established. That's why I came in personally when I heard you were here. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Officer Miller is relatively new to our department. Transferred from a smaller municipality last year, this incident raises some concerns I've been monitoring. Such as, I prompted. Such as a pattern of domestic calls that seem to escalate when he's involved, and a tendency to call on personal connections within the department rather than following protocol. She met my eyes directly. Had I known the juvenile involved was your grandson, I would have supervised this case more closely from the beginning. Because he's related to me? I challenged. Or because every juvenile deserves that level of care? A hint of respect flickered in her eyes. Point taken, Your Honor. Now let's discuss how we move forward from here. First, I began, maintaining the measured tone that had served me well through decades on the bench. I want to see the statement Officer Miller filed against my grandson. Then, I want to know what evidence, if any, supports his claim of assault beyond his own testimony. Captain Reynolds nodded, opening a thin file folder on her desk. Officer Miller's statement claims that Tyler became verbally abusive when confronted about breaking house rules, then physically assaulted him when asked to leave the premises for the night to cool down. He states that Tyler pushed him against a door frame, resulting in minor injuries. And what evidence corroborates this version of events? Reynolds' pause was telling. Officer Peterson didn't document any visible injuries on Miller. The responding officer's initial report mentions Miller's claim of being pushed, but notes no observable physical evidence. So we have an adult officer of the law claiming assault by a 16-year-old boy, with no witnesses, no documented injuries, and no evidence beyond his word, I summarized. Meanwhile, my grandson has visible marks on his face consistent with being slapped, which your own medical staff has now documented. Yes, that's an accurate assessment, Reynolds acknowledged. And did the responding officers ask why a minor was being put out of his home in the middle of the night? Or why his mother wasn't present? Or whether there was any history of conflict between Miller and my grandson? Reynolds closed the folder with a sigh. No, they did not. They responded to a call from a fellow officer and processed the situation accordingly. You mean they showed professional courtesy to one of their own at the expense of a child's rights? I corrected, allowing a hint of the indignation I felt to color my voice. That appears to be the case, Reynolds admitted. She leaned forward, lowering her voice slightly. Judge Sullivan, I inherited a department with some entrenched cultural issues. What happened tonight is a symptom of a larger problem I've been working to address. Under different circumstances, I might have sympathized with her position. Reforming institutional culture was difficult work. I'd faced similar challenges during my early years on the bench, but tonight, with Tyler sitting alone in a holding room, my focus remained singular. I appreciate your candor, Captain, but my immediate concern is my grandson. I want him released into my custody immediately, and I want Officer Miller's so-called evidence, Tyler's phone, secured properly. I have reason to believe it contains recordings that will directly contradict Miller's statement. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Recordings? Tyler has been documenting Miller's behavior over the past weeks, as any reasonable person might when they feel threatened in their own home. Miller discovered these recordings tonight, which precipitated his aggressive response. The captain tapped her pen thoughtfully against the desk. That would explain why Miller was so insistent on maintaining possession of the phone as evidence. He claimed it contained threats from Tyler. I think we both know what that phone actually contains, Captain, I replied, holding her gaze steadily. After a moment's consideration, Reynolds reached for her desk phone. Peterson, she said when the officer answered, I need you to retrieve the cell phone collected as evidence in the Sullivan case. Bring it directly to my office and prepare release paperwork for the juvenile. She hung up, then turned back to me. Judge Sullivan, I'm releasing Tyler into your custody pending further investigation. However, I should note that this situation is complicated by guardianship issues. His mother is his legal guardian, not you. I'm aware of the legal technicalities, I replied. But given that Jennifer is currently working a hospital night shift and her home is potentially unsafe due to Miller's presence, I believe even the most cursory application of the best interest of the child standard would support temporary placement with me. I agree, but we'll need to contact his mother. Of course, I'll call her myself once Tyler is safely with me. Peterson arrived with Tyler's phone in an evidence bag, placing it on the captain's desk with a nervousness that suggested he was fully aware of the potential trouble brewing. The phone is locked, he reported, avoiding my gaze. Tyler can unlock it, I stated, under proper supervision to maintain chain of custody. Reynolds nodded. Have the juvenile brought here. When Tyler entered minutes later, his eyes darted anxiously between the adults before settling on me. I gave him a reassuring nod. Tyler, Reynolds began, her tone deliberately gentle. We need to access the contents of your phone as part of our investigation. Can you unlock it for us? He glanced at me again, and I nodded once more. It's all right. We need to verify your account of what happened. Tyler took the phone from its evidence bag and entered his passcode. The recordings are in a password-protected app, he explained, his voice steadier now. I started keeping them after the second week we lived there, when Robert threw my backpack across the room because I was late coming home from school. He navigated to an innocuous-looking calculator app, entered another code, and suddenly the interface changed to reveal a list of audio files, each labeled with dates and brief descriptions. This is tonight, Tyler said, selecting the most recent file. The recording began with mundane household sounds, then captured a door opening forcefully. Who are you talking to? Robert's voice, sharp with suspicion. Just Grandma, Tyler's voice replied, sounding deliberately casual. Give me that phone. What have I told you about calling her without permission? The aggression in Robert's tone was unmistakable. You can't just take my phone? Tyler's protest was cut short by a sound that could only be interpreted as a slap, followed by a sharp intake of breath. In my house, you follow my rules. Your grandmother isn't your parent. I am. Well, look at this. Recording apps? You've been spying on me? The confrontation escalated, with Robert's threats becoming increasingly explicit, ordering Tyler to leave, threatening to teach him respect, and finally the sounds of a physical altercation where Robert could clearly be heard saying, "I'm going to make you regret this, you little," before a thud and curse suggested he had fallen. "You assaulted an officer," Robert's voice continued, now cold with calculation. "Let's see how your precious grandmother helps you when you're in juvenile detention. My guys will be here in 5 minutes." Reynolds stopped the playback, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes hard with controlled anger. "I think we've heard enough to establish that Officer Miller's statement contradicts objective evidence." "Indeed," I agreed, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Captain, I believe we've established sufficient cause for Tyler's immediate release into my custody, as well as serious concerns about Officer Miller's truthfulness in an official report." Reynolds nodded, turning to Peterson, who stood pale-faced by the door. "Process the juvenile's release immediately, then contact Internal Affairs and have them meet me here at 8 a.m. As Peterson escorted Tyler out to complete the release paperwork, Reynolds regarded me with a mixture of respect and wariness. "You know this isn't over, Judge Sullivan. Miller won't take this lying down, especially once he realizes the phone is in our possession." "I'm counting on it," I replied, feeling the familiar clarity of purpose that had guided my judicial career. "Some lessons about accountability are long overdue." "First," I began, maintaining the measured tone that had served me well through decades on the bench, "I want to see the statement Officer Miller filed against my grandson. Then I want to know what evidence, if any, supports his claim of assault beyond his own testimony." Captain Reynolds nodded, opening a thin file folder on her desk. "Officer Miller's statement claims that Tyler became verbally abusive when confronted about breaking house rules, then physically assaulted him when asked to leave the premises for the night to cool down. He states that Tyler pushed him against a door frame, resulting in minor injuries. And what evidence corroborates this version of events?" Reynolds' pause was telling. "Officer Peterson didn't document any visible injuries on Miller. The responding officer's initial report mentions Miller's claim of being pushed, but notes no observable physical evidence. So we have an adult officer of the law claiming assault by a 16-year-old boy, with no witnesses, no documented injuries, and no evidence beyond his word," I summarized. "Meanwhile, my grandson has visible marks on his face consistent with being slapped, which your own medical staff has now documented." "Yes, that's an accurate assessment," Reynolds acknowledged. "And did the responding officers ask why a minor was being put out of his home in the middle of the night, or why his mother wasn't present, or whether there was any history of conflict between Miller and my grandson?" Reynolds closed the folder with a sigh. "No, they did not. They responded to a call from a fellow officer and processed the situation accordingly." "You mean they showed professional courtesy to one of their own at the expense of a child's rights?" I corrected, allowing a hint of the indignation I felt to color my voice. "That appears to be the case," Reynolds admitted. She leaned forward, lowering her voice slightly. "Judge Sullivan, I inherited a department with some entrenched cultural issues. What happened tonight is a symptom of a larger problem I've been working to address. Under different circumstances, I might have sympathized with her position. Reforming institutional culture was difficult work. I'd faced similar challenges during my early years on the bench. But tonight, with Tyler sitting alone in a holding room, my focus remained singular. I appreciate your candor, Captain, but my immediate concern is my grandson. I want him released into my custody immediately, and I want Officer Miller's so-called evidence, Tyler's phone, secured properly. I have reason to believe it contains recordings that will directly contradict Miller's statement." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Recordings? Tyler has been documenting Miller's behavior over the past weeks, as any reasonable person might when they feel threatened in their own home. Miller discovered these recordings tonight, which precipitated his aggressive response." The captain tapped her pen thoughtfully against the desk. "That would explain why Miller was so insistent on maintaining possession of the phone as evidence. He claimed it contained threats from Tyler. I think we both know what that phone actually contains, Captain," I replied, holding her gaze steadily. After a moment's consideration, Reynolds reached for her desk phone. "Peterson," she said when the officer answered, "I need you to retrieve the cell phone collected as evidence in the Sullivan case, bring it directly to my office, and prepare release paperwork for the juvenile." She hung up, then turned back to me. "Judge Sullivan, I'm releasing Tyler into your custody pending further investigation. However, I should note that this situation is complicated by guardianship issues. His mother is his legal guardian, not you. I'm aware of the legal technicalities, I replied. But given that Jennifer is currently working a hospital night shift, and her home is potentially unsafe due to Miller's presence, I believe even the most cursory application of the best interests of the child standard would support temporary placement with me. I agree, but we'll need to contact his mother. Of course, I'll call her myself once Tyler is safely with me. Peterson arrived with Tyler's phone in an evidence bag, placing it on the captain's desk with a nervousness that suggested he was fully aware of the potential trouble brewing. The phone is locked, he reported, avoiding my gaze. Tyler can unlock it, I stated, under proper supervision to maintain chain of custody. Reynolds nodded. Have the juvenile brought here. When Tyler entered minutes later, his eyes darted anxiously between the adults before settling on me. I gave him a reassuring nod. Tyler, Reynolds began, her tone deliberately gentle. We need to access the contents of your phone as part of our investigation. Can you unlock it for us? He glanced at me again, and I nodded once more. It's all right. We need to verify your account of what happened. Tyler took the phone from its evidence bag and entered his passcode. The recordings are in a password-protected app, he explained, his voice steadier now. I started keeping them after the second week we lived there, when Robert threw my backpack across the room because I was late coming home from school. He navigated to an innocuous-looking calculator app, entered another code, and suddenly the interface changed to reveal a list of audio files, each labeled with dates and brief descriptions. This is tonight, Tyler said, selecting the most recent file. The recording began with mundane household sounds, then captured a door opening forcefully. Who are you talking to? Robert's voice, sharp with suspicion. Just Grandma, Tyler's voice replied, sounding deliberately casual. Give me that phone. What have I told you about calling her without permission? The aggression in Robert's tone was unmistakable. You can't just take my phone? Tyler's protest was cut short by a sound that could only be interpreted as a slap, followed by a sharp intake of breath. In my house, you follow my rules. Your grandmother isn't your parent. I am. Well, look at this. Recording apps? You've been spying on me? The confrontation escalated, with Robert's threats becoming increasingly explicit, ordering Tyler to leave, threatening to teach him respect, and finally the sounds of a physical altercation where Robert could clearly be heard saying, I'm going to make you regret this, you little, before a thud and curse suggested he had fallen. You assaulted an officer, Robert's voice continued, now cold with calculation. Let's see how your precious grandmother helps you when you're in juvenile detention. My guys will be here in 5 minutes. Reynolds stopped the playback, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes hard with controlled anger. I think we've heard enough to establish that Officer Miller's statement contradicts objective evidence. Indeed, I agreed, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. Captain, I believe we've established sufficient cause for Tyler's immediate release into my custody, as well as serious concerns about Officer Miller's truthfulness in an official report. Reynolds nodded, turning to Peterson, who stood pale-faced by the door. Process the juvenile's release immediately, then contact Internal Affairs and have them meet me here at 8 a.m. As Peterson escorted Tyler out to complete the release paperwork, Reynolds regarded me with a mixture of respect and wariness. You know this isn't over, Judge Sullivan. Miller won't take this lying down, especially once he realizes the phone is in our possession. I'm counting on it, I replied, feeling the familiar clarity of purpose that had guided my judicial career. Some lessons about accountability are long overdue. Dawn was breaking as Tyler and I left the police station, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He walked beside me in silence, his shoulders hunched slightly in the too thin jacket he'd been wearing when Robert forced him out of the house. The April morning carried a chill that went beyond temperature, a reminder that winter hadn't fully released its grip on coastal Maine. We should call your mother, I said once we were settled in my car, the engine running to warm the interior. Her shift must be ending soon. Tyler stared out the window, his profile so reminiscent of Michael at that age that my heart constricted momentarily. She'll be mad, he said quietly. She always takes his side. She deserves to know where you are, I replied, keeping my tone neutral despite the anger I felt toward Jennifer for allowing this situation to develop. And she needs to hear what happened from us before she hears Robert's version. Tyler nodded reluctantly, and I dialed Jennifer's cell phone. The call went to voicemail. Not surprising given hospital protocols about personal calls during shifts. Jennifer, it's Margaret. Tyler is with me in Portland. There was an incident with Robert last night that resulted in Tyler being taken to the police station. He's fine, and I'm taking him back to Boston with me for the time being. Please call me as soon as you get this message. I ended the call, then glanced at Tyler. Are you hungry? We could stop for breakfast on the way back to Boston. I just want to go home, he said, then clarified. Your home, I mean. The distinction wasn't lost on me. In the months since Jennifer had moved Tyler to Portland to live with a man she'd known for mere weeks, my house in Boston had become his emotional anchor, the place he mentally retreated to during our phone calls, the stability he clung to as his world shifted beneath him. Home it is, I agreed, pulling out of the parking lot. We can pick up something on the way. We were halfway to the interstate when my phone rang. Jennifer's name flashed on the car's display. Margaret, what's going on? Why is Tyler with you? Her voice carried the strained edge of someone trying to contain panic. I switched to speaker so Tyler could hear. There was an incident last night, Jennifer. Robert ordered Tyler to leave the house, then called the police claiming Tyler had assaulted him. I drove up as soon as Tyler called me from the station. That can't be right, Jennifer protested. Robert wouldn't. He's a police officer, for God's sake. Mom, Tyler interjected. He slapped me across the face when he caught me talking to Grandma. It's all recorded on my phone. What? Tyler, are you making things up again? Robert told me you've been exaggerating things to get attention. Jennifer, I cut in sharply. There are recorded statements and documented physical evidence supporting Tyler's account. The police captain is launching an internal investigation based on what she heard. A brief silence followed. Then Jennifer's voice returned, smaller now. I just got off a 12-hour shift. I can't process this right now. Let me talk to Robert and... No, I stated firmly. Tyler is coming back to Boston with me. He has visible marks on his face from being slapped, and Robert is on record threatening to use his position to punish Tyler through the legal system. This isn't a situation where you talk to Robert and smooth things over. You can't just take my son, Margaret. Jennifer's voice rose with a hint of hysteria. You don't have the right... What I have, I interrupted, maintaining the calm authority that had served me for decades, is a moral obligation to protect my grandson from an abusive situation. Tyler is 16, old enough for the courts to consider his preference regarding where he lives. If you want to pursue this legally, I'll be happy to present the evidence we've gathered to a family court judge. The implicit threat hung between us. We both knew what would happen if this went before a judge, especially with Tyler's recordings, the documented physical abuse, and my standing in the legal community. I need to see him, Jennifer said finally, her voice cracking, to make sure he's okay. You're welcome to come to Boston, I replied. My door is always open to you, Jennifer. It has been since Michael died, but I won't bring Tyler back to Portland while Robert remains in that house. After we disconnected, Tyler stared out the window for several miles before speaking again. She won't leave him, will she? The question carried the weight of a child's disappointed realization about a parent's limitations. I'd faced similar moments with Michael during his adolescence, those painful instances when he'd recognized that his father and I weren't infallible. I don't know, I answered honestly. Your mother has been searching for stability since your father died. Sometimes that search leads people to make compromises they shouldn't, like moving us away from everything we knew for a guy she barely knew, Tyler said bitterly. She thought she was building something better for both of you, I offered, though my own anger at Jennifer's choices made the words feel hollow. Love and fear can cloud judgment in ways that seem incomprehensible from the outside. We stopped at a diner just over the New Hampshire border, both of us needing food and a break from the car. Seated in a worn vinyl booth with coffee and pancakes between us, Tyler finally relaxed enough to ask the question I'd been waiting for. What happens now, Grandma? I considered my answer carefully. At 16, Tyler deserved honesty, not false reassurance. Legally, your mother is still your guardian. In the short term, you'll stay with me while this situation resolves. Captain Reynolds will investigate Robert's false report and the inappropriate response from her officers. There may be disciplinary action against him. Will I have to go back? The fear in his voice was palpable. Not if you don't want to, I assured him. There are legal mechanisms to modify custody arrangements, especially in cases involving documented abuse. And as I reminded your mother, at your age, the court gives significant weight to your preferences. Tyler nodded, absorbing this information with the serious consideration that had always marked his character. Like his father, he tended to process difficult emotions internally before responding. I should call Aunt Catherine, he said finally. She'll be worried when she hears about this. I smiled slightly at the mention of my daughter. Catherine's academic position in Toronto kept her physically distant, but she maintained a close relationship with Tyler through weekly video calls and summer visits. That's thoughtful of you. We'll call her when we get home. As we continued our journey south, I found my thoughts turning toward practical matters. I would need to contact my attorney to discuss custody options. Tyler's school records would need to be transferred if he stayed in Boston long-term. The guest room that had gradually accumulated his books and belongings during weekend visits would need to become a proper bedroom. These tangible tasks provided a framework for the more nebulous emotional work ahead, helping Tyler process the betrayal by a trusted adult, navigating the shifting relationship with his mother, rebuilding his sense of safety and stability. By the time we crossed into Massachusetts, Tyler had fallen asleep against the passenger window, the exhaustion of the night's trauma finally catching up to him. I glanced at his peaceful face, so like Michael's, and felt the familiar mix of grief and fierce protectiveness that had defined my life since my son's death. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same unwavering resolve I had brought to the bench for 30 years. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of personal cost, and none more so than this. We arrived at my house in Brookline just before noon. The stately Victorian had been my home for over 30 years, purchased when Michael was still a child, and I was a newly appointed federal judge. In the 7 years since his death, the house had gradually transformed from a reminder of what I'd lost to a sanctuary for what remained, particularly my relationship with Tyler. Why don't you go up and rest? I suggested, as we carried his meager belongings inside. Just the backpack Robert had thrown onto the lawn, and a plastic bag containing items retrieved from the police station. I need to make some calls, and you've had a long night. Tyler nodded, fatigue evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. Can we talk about school later? I don't want to fall behind. The question was so characteristic of him, conscientious even in crisis, that I felt a surge of pride mingled with sorrow. Of course, nothing needs to be decided immediately. Once Tyler had disappeared upstairs, I settled in my home office and began the process of documenting everything while the details remained fresh. Decades on the bench had taught me the crucial importance of contemporaneous records, especially in cases where power dynamics might later skew perceptions. I had just finished typing my detailed account of the night's events when my phone rang. Catherine's name flashed on the screen. Mom? What's going on? My daughter's voice carried the familiar mix of academic precision and underlying concern. I just got the strangest call from Jennifer. Something about you taking Tyler to Boston without permission? That's not quite accurate, I replied, unsurprised that Jennifer had reached out to Catherine. Tyler was forcibly removed from Jennifer's home by her boyfriend, falsely accused of assault, and taken to a police station. I retrieved him and brought him to safety. Wait, what? Catherine's academic detachment vanished. Start from the beginning, please. I outlined the events of the previous night, including the recordings Tyler had made and the documented evidence of physical abuse. My God, Catherine breathed when I finished. Is he okay? Physically, I mean. He has some bruising on his face, but nothing serious. The emotional impact is harder to gauge. I'm coming down this weekend, she decided. I can rearrange my schedule. That would be good for him, I agreed. He mentioned calling you himself once he's rested. After finishing with Catherine, I made the call I'd been planning since leaving Portland, to Richard Harmon, a family court attorney I'd known for 20 years. Richard had appeared before me numerous times during my judicial career, and while I'd found him occasionally overzealous in his advocacy, his dedication to his clients had always been beyond reproach. Judge Sullivan, he greeted me warmly after his secretary put the call through. This is an unexpected pleasure. I'm afraid it's not a social call, Richard, I replied. I need advice regarding a custody situation involving my grandson. His tone shifted immediately to professional focus as I outlined the circumstances. When I mentioned the recordings and the police involvement, he made a thoughtful humming sound. The documentation you've described provides strong grounds for an emergency custody petition, he said. particularly given your standing and the fact that the minor has expressed a preference to reside with you. I want to be clear, I told him. My goal isn't to permanently separate Tyler from his mother. Jennifer has been a good parent overall, despite some poor decisions recently. Understood. We can frame this as temporary custody pending family counseling and resolution of the domestic situation. He paused. Have you spoken with Jennifer since returning to Boston? Briefly, when we were leaving Portland. She was just finishing a night shift and wasn't in a state to discuss matters rationally. She'll likely contact you again once she's spoken with her boyfriend. Be careful about those conversations, Margaret. Anything you say could potentially be used in custody proceedings. I'm well aware of how statements can be misrepresented in legal proceedings, Richard. I reminded him dryly. I spent 30 years evaluating such testimony. He chuckled. Of course, force of habit to warn clients. I'll draft the emergency custody petition today, but we won't file until you give the word. It's sometimes better to have the document ready while pursuing less adversarial approaches first. After ending the call, I checked on Tyler and found him asleep, still fully clothed atop the covers of the bed in the room that had gradually become his overyears of weekend visits. I gently removed his shoes and pulled a blanket over him, remembering countless similar moments from his childhood, the physical gestures of care that remained constant, even as children grew and circumstances changed. Downstairs again, I was preparing lunch when the doorbell rang. Through the stained glass panels flanking the front door, I recognized Jennifer's slight figure. I took a steadying breath before opening the door. My former daughter-in-law stood on the porch, still wearing the rumpled scrubs from her hospital shift, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. The dark circles beneath her eyes spoke of more than just a night's missed sleep. She looked simultaneously angry and fragile, like porcelain on the verge of shattering. "Where's my son?" she demanded without preamble. "Sleeping," I replied, keeping my voice even. "He's exhausted, Jennifer. It's been a traumatic night. You had no right to take him across state lines without my permission. I had every right to remove him from an abusive situation," I countered. "Would you have preferred I left him in police custody while Robert's colleagues decided whether to believe false accusations against him?" Jennifer flinched slightly. "Robert says Tyler has been manipulating you, twisting things to make him look bad. There are recordings, Jennifer. I heard them myself. Captain Reynolds heard them. There is documented physical evidence of Robert striking Tyler. These aren't matters of interpretation, they're facts." She faltered, uncertainty crossing her face. "He said Tyler deliberately provoked him, that the recordings were taken out of context. Why don't you come in?" I suggested, softening my tone. "You look exhausted, and this isn't a conversation we should have on the doorstep." In the kitchen, I poured her a cup of coffee, observing how her hands trembled slightly as she added cream. The Jennifer I'd known since she began dating Michael in college had always been sensitive but resilient, a compassionate nurse who approached life's challenges with quiet determination. The woman before me now seemed hollowed out, her confidence eroded. "Robert called me after you left the station," she said, staring into her cup. "He said Tyler had been disrespectful, that he asked him to leave just to cool down for a few hours. He never mentioned hitting him. Men like Robert rarely admit to their abusive behaviors," I noted. "They justify, minimize, and shift blame." "You've always disliked him," Jennifer accused, a flash of defensiveness returning. "You never gave him a chance." "I never met him," I reminded her gently. "You moved Tyler 2 hours away to live with a man I've never been introduced to. A man who, according to Tyler, explicitly forbade him from contacting me without permission." Jennifer's gaze dropped again. "He said Tyler was too dependent on you, that it wasn't healthy. Isolating someone from their support network is a classic control tactic, Jennifer. As a nurse, you've surely encountered this pattern in your patients." She didn't respond, but the slight tightening of her jaw told me the point had landed. We sat in silence for a moment, the kitchen clock ticking steadily in the background. "I want to see him," she finally said, her voice smaller now. "Of course, but I won't wake him. He needs rest." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "Jennifer, what are your plans regarding Robert?" Her hands tightened around the coffee mug. "I don't know. This all happened so fast. I need time to think, to talk to him properly." "While you're thinking," I said, maintaining my judicial calm, "Tyler will stay here where he's safe. That's non-negotiable." Jennifer's shoulders slumped at my words, the fight visibly draining from her. "Can I at least see him before I go?" Just to make sure he's okay? I nodded, leading her upstairs to the guest room, or rather, Tyler's room, as it had increasingly become. We found him still asleep, his face relaxed in unconsciousness, but the reddish mark on his cheek now darkening into what would become a bruise. Jennifer's sharp intake of breath was involuntary. She moved to the bedside, her nurse's eyes clinically assessing the injury, even as her mother's heart visibly broke at the sight. Gently, she brushed back a strand of hair from Tyler's forehead, careful not to wake him. "Robert did this?" she whispered, doubt finally giving way to the unavoidable evidence before her. "Yes," I confirmed quietly. "The police medical staff documented it. There are photographs in the official record." We retreated to the hallway, closing the door softly behind us. Jennifer leaned against the wall, suddenly looking every hour of her sleepless night. "I don't understand," she said, more to herself than to me. "He's always been so careful, so controlled around me." "That's often how it works," I replied. "The face shown to the world can be very different from the one revealed behind closed doors. I saw it countless times in my courtroom." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Tyler tried to tell me Robert was different when I wasn't around. I thought he was just being difficult, resisting the move." Her voice trailed off, the implications of her dismissal of her son's concerns settling heavily between us. "What happens now?" she asked after a moment. "That depends largely on you," I told her frankly. "Tyler needs stability and safety. He can stay with me as long as necessary. If you choose to return to Robert, we'll need to formalize a temporary custody arrangement." "You mean, take him from me legally?" Her voice carried a hint of the earlier defensiveness. "I mean, protect him while you sort out your living situation," I corrected gently. "Jennifer, this isn't about punishing you. It's about ensuring Tyler's well-being during a complicated time." She nodded slowly, fatigue evident in every line of her body. "I should go. I have a lot to think about, and I'm dead on my feet." "Where will you go?" I asked, concern overriding my frustration with her. Despite everything, she was still the woman my son had loved, the mother of my grandson. "I got a room at the Holiday Inn near the hospital. I'm not going back to Portland today. I need time to think clearly without Robert there." Relief washed through me at this small indication of good judgment. "That's wise. You're welcome to stay here if you prefer." Jennifer shook her head. "No, I need space to process everything. Tell Tyler I came by, that I love him." "Of course." After showing Jennifer out, I returned to my office, the emotional weight of the confrontation settling heavily on my shoulders. In my years on the bench, I had maintained professional detachment from the family dramas unfolding before me. Now, I found myself at the center of one, navigating the blurred lines between my roles as grandmother, advocate, and de facto judge of what constituted Tyler's best interests. Around 3 in the afternoon, Tyler emerged from his room, hair tousled from sleep, but eyes clearer than they had been earlier. "I thought I heard Mom's voice," he said, joining me in the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. "She came by while you were sleeping," I confirmed, setting down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables. "She wanted to make sure you were all right." Tyler's expression was carefully neutral, a mask I recognized from the difficult months after Michael's death, when he'd tried so hard to be strong for his mother. "Is she going back to him?" "She's staying at a hotel in Boston tonight. She needs time to think." He nodded, absorbing this information with the thoughtful consideration that sometimes made him seem older than his 16 years. "So I can stay here? For now, at least? For as long as necessary," I assured him. "I've spoken to an attorney about formalizing a temporary arrangement just to make sure there are no legal complications, like Robert trying to force me to come back." The anxiety in his voice was painful to hear. "That won't happen," I said firmly. "Between the police report, your recordings, and the documented injury, there's more than enough evidence to keep you safely here." Tyler's shoulders relaxed slightly. "What about school? The semester's not over yet." "We have options," I told him, returning to my vegetable preparation. "We can arrange for you to finish the year remotely or transfer to your old school here in Boston. Nothing needs to be decided immediately." He picked up a knife and began helping me chop, falling into the comfortable rhythm we'd established during countless weekend cooking sessions over the years. "I'd rather go back to Boston Latin, if that's possible. I never wanted to leave in the first place." The unspoken criticism of his mother's decision hung between us. I chose my response carefully, aware of the delicate balance between supporting Tyler and not undermining Jennifer more than circumstances already had. We'll look into the transfer process tomorrow. In the meantime, why don't you reach out to Aunt Catherine? She called earlier and was very concerned. Tyler nodded, seeming relieved to have a concrete task. I'll video call her after dinner. Our evening settled into a semblance of normalcy. Dinner, a game of chess that had become our tradition, and Tyler's call with Catherine that lasted over an hour. From the fragments I overheard, he was sharing details with his aunt that he might have held back from me, a natural part of adolescence, even in unconventional circumstances. After Tyler went to bed, I poured myself a small glass of bourbon, a rare indulgence I allowed myself in moments of particular stress. Sitting in my study, surrounded by law books and family photographs, I found myself studying a picture taken at Tyler's 10th birthday. Michael had been gone less than a year, and the grief was still raw in all our faces. But there was also resilience there. Jennifer's arm protectively around Tyler, my hand on his shoulder, Catherine smiling encouragingly from behind the cake. We had weathered that devastating loss together, finding strength in our connections despite the pain. Now those same connections were being tested in a different way. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer. Spoke with Robert. He's claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Says the recordings are misleading, but he couldn't explain the mark on Tyler's face. I'm not going back to Portland tomorrow. Need more time. I considered my response carefully, aware of the legal implications of anything I put in writing. Take all the time you need. Tyler is safe here. When you're ready to talk about next steps, I'm available. I added after a moment. This isn't your fault, Jennifer. Manipulative people are expert at hiding their true nature. Her reply came quickly. Isn't it? I moved my son away from his school, his friends, his support system, from you, for a man I barely knew. What kind of mother does that? The raw self-recrimination in her words softened my frustration with her. A human one. We all make mistakes, especially when grief and loneliness cloud our judgment. What matters now is how we move forward. There was a long pause before her final message of the night. Thank you for protecting him when I didn't. I set down my phone, the complex emotions of the day settling into a determined clarity. Whatever came next, custody negotiations, possible legal proceedings against Robert, the delicate work of rebuilding Tyler's sense of security, I would face it with the same precise attention to justice and compassion that had guided my judicial career. Some battles were fought in formal courtrooms with gavels and legal precedents. Others unfolded in living rooms and kitchens with chess games and difficult conversations. But the principles remained the same. Protect the vulnerable, uphold the truth, and remember that healing, like justice, sometimes requires difficult passages before resolution can be found. The next morning brought the practical aftermath of crisis. Phone calls, arrangements, and the slow process of establishing a new normal. I contacted Boston Latin School about re-enrollment procedures while Tyler organized his limited belongings in the room that was now officially his again. They'll need your recent academic records, I told him after speaking with the school's registrar. And there's a meeting with the guidance counselor next Tuesday. Tyler nodded, relief evident in his expression. So I can go back to my old school? It looks promising. Your previous academic standing works in your favor. I paused, watching him carefully. Are you concerned about seeing your old friends again? Explaining why you're back? He considered this, arranging books on the shelf with methodical precision. A little, but most of them never understood why I left in the first place. They'll probably just be glad I'm back. The doorbell interrupted our conversation, and Tyler tensed visibly, a new wariness that hadn't been present before Robert entered his life. I squeezed his shoulder reassuringly before going to answer. Captain Diane Reynolds stood on my doorstep, now in civilian clothes rather than her police uniform. The drive from Portland to Boston would have taken her at least 2 hours, making this visit a significant investment of her personal time. Judge Sullivan, she greeted me formally. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I felt this matter warranted an in-person discussion. I invited her in, leading her to my study where we could speak privately. Has there been a development in the case against Officer Miller? Reynolds nodded, her expression grave. Several, actually. After reviewing the evidence and interviewing the responding officers, I placed Miller on administrative leave pending a full investigation. I appreciate your taking this seriously, I said, motioning for her to take a seat. The situation is more concerning than initially apparent. Reynolds leaned forward slightly, her professional demeanor giving way to genuine worry. In the process of investigating Miller's conduct regarding your grandson, we discovered previous incidents that were improperly handled. 2 domestic calls at residences where Miller had stayed with former girlfriends. The reports were filed and then effectively buried. My judicial instincts sharpened immediately. You're saying there's a pattern of behavior? Yes. And a pattern of protection from within the department. She met my gaze directly. Judge Sullivan, I've initiated a broader internal investigation, but I wanted to inform you personally because these findings could have implications for your grandson's case and potentially for his mother's safety. The weight of her words settled heavily between us. You believe Jennifer could be in danger. Based on the emerging pattern, yes. Men who engage in this type of controlling behavior rarely limit it to one target, and they often escalate when they feel their control slipping. I thought of Jennifer's text message from the night before, her admission that she wasn't returning to Portland immediately. She's currently staying at a hotel here in Boston. She's aware of what happened to Tyler, though she's still processing it. Reynolds nodded. That's good. I would strongly encourage her to maintain distance from Miller while our investigation proceeds. She hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know. Miller has made statements to colleagues suggesting he plans to contest your custody of Tyler. He's characterizing the situation as a manipulative teenager turning his grandmother against his stepfather. He's not Tyler's stepfather, I pointed out, an edge creeping into my voice. And any custody challenge would need to come from Jennifer, not him. Of course, Reynolds agreed, but I wanted you to be aware of his narrative building. In my experience, men like Miller don't relinquish control easily. After Reynolds departed, promising to keep me updated on the investigation, I found Tyler in the kitchen making sandwiches for lunch. That was the police captain from Portland, I explained, helping him gather plates. She came to update me on the investigation into Robert. Tyler's hands stilled momentarily. Is he going to get in trouble? Really in trouble, I mean? It appears so. They've placed him on administrative leave and are investigating other incidents from his past. He absorbed this information with visible relief. So they believe me. Not just because you're you, but because the evidence actually matters. His comment struck deeper than he likely intended, highlighting his underlying fear that justice might depend solely on connections and power rather than truth. In that moment, I glimpsed how the events of the past days had shaken not just his sense of personal safety, but his faith in fundamental fairness. The evidence matters, I confirmed. Your voice matters, Tyler. What happened to you was wrong, and there are still people in the system who recognize that and act accordingly. His slight nod acknowledged my words, but I could see the cynicism that had taken root, a premature disillusionment that pained me to witness in someone so young. Our afternoon was interrupted by another unexpected visitor, Jennifer, looking marginally more rested than the day before, but still carrying the haunted expression of someone whose foundations had crumbled beneath her. Tyler's greeting was cautious, a careful hug that revealed both his lingering love for his mother and his new wariness. I gave them space, retreating to the kitchen while they spoke in the living room, their voices occasionally rising enough for fragments to reach me. Jennifer's tearful apologies, Tyler's measured responses, the careful negotiation of hurt and forgiveness. When I rejoined them with tea, they had reached some kind of tentative understanding. Jennifer looked up as I entered, her eyes red-rimmed but clearer. I've told Tyler I'm not going back to Portland, she said, her voice steadier than it had been yesterday. I've called the hospital to request a transfer to a Boston facility. It might take some time to arrange, but I'm not going back to that house. Relief washed through me, though I kept my expression neutral. That sounds like a wise decision. You're welcome to stay here while you make arrangements. Jennifer shook her head. I appreciate that, Margaret, but I think some separate space would be healthier for now. I've extended my hotel stay for another week while I look for an apartment. What about Robert? Tyler asked, the question direct in the way only adolescents can manage. He won't just let you leave. I'm not asking permission, Jennifer replied, a hint of her former determination emerging. I've already called a moving company to pack my personal belongings, and Captain Reynolds called me this morning to warn me about other incidents in Robert's past. She turned to me, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, the recognition that Robert represented a danger neither of us had fully appreciated until now. "I'd like Tyler to stay with you for the time being," she continued, "until I'm settled and he's re-enrolled in school here, if you're willing." "Of course," I assured her, careful to keep any hint of "I told you so" from my tone. "We'll need to formalize the arrangement for school enrollment purposes, but that can be handled with a simple temporary guardianship form." Tyler, who had been watching this exchange intently, visibly relaxed at the absence of conflict between his mother and me. For perhaps the first time since Michael's death, we were presenting a truly united front in prioritizing his well-being. After Jennifer left, promising to return the next day to help Tyler inventory what possessions needed to be retrieved from Portland, I found myself reflecting on the rapid reconfiguration of our family dynamics. In the space of 48 hours, the delicate balance we had maintained for years had shifted fundamentally. Jennifer acknowledging her missteps, Tyler asserting his needs more directly, and me stepping into a more active role in decisions affecting his future. "Do you think she'll really stay away from him?" Tyler asked that evening as we prepared dinner together. The question cut to the heart of his lingering uncertainty, not about his own safety with me, but about his mother's ability to maintain her newfound resolve. "I believe she wants to," I answered carefully. "And now that she knows the full situation, she has more strength to do so. But leaving a controlling relationship is rarely a single decision. It's a process." Tyler nodded, his expression thoughtful as he continued chopping vegetables. "That's why I need to stay with you for now, to give her space to figure it out without worrying about me." "Partly," I agreed, "but also because you deserve stability and safety while all this gets sorted out." "Grandma," he said after a moment, his voice taking on the slightly hesitant quality that usually preceded a difficult question, "do you think Dad would be disappointed about how everything turned out after he died?" The question pierced my practiced composure, touching the grief we both carried. I set down my knife, turning to face him fully. "Your father would be immensely proud of you, Tyler. Your resilience, your courage in standing up for yourself, your compassion toward your mother despite everything, these are all qualities Michael valued deeply." Tyler's eyes glistened slightly, but he nodded, accepting this assessment from the person who had perhaps known Michael best. We returned to our cooking, the comfortable rhythm of shared work providing its own form of healing as we continued navigating the aftermath of broken trust and the tentative beginnings of reconstruction. 2 weeks after Robert's unwelcome appearance at my house, we gathered at Suffolk County Family Court for the hearing that would formalize Tyler's custody arrangement. The temporary guardianship papers had served their immediate purpose, but Richard Harmon had advised pursuing a more comprehensive legal framework, given Robert's continued attempts to insert himself into the situation. "The judge needs to understand the full context," Richard explained as we waited in the courthouse corridor, his briefcase balanced on his knee as he reviewed documents one final time. "The restraining order against Miller helps, but establishing a clear custody arrangement with Jennifer's explicit consent provides another layer of protection." Tyler sat between Jennifer and me on the wooden bench, unusually formal in the button-down shirt and khakis I'd helped him select that morning. At 16, he was technically old enough for the judge to consider his preferences, but still young enough to be visibly intimidated by the institutional solemnity of the courthouse. "Will I have to speak?" he asked, straightening his collar for perhaps the 5th time. "The judge may ask you some questions," Richard confirmed, "but they'll be straightforward. About your preferences, your experiences. Just answer honestly." Jennifer reached over to squeeze Tyler's hand. The past weeks had brought a noticeable change in her, a gradual reclaiming of the confidence and clarity that had characterized her before Michael's death. Her successful interview at Massachusetts General had resulted in a job offer, and she'd secured a small apartment near the hospital, beginning the process of rebuilding her life independent of Robert's influence. "Remember," she told Tyler softly, "this isn't about choosing between me and Grandma. It's about creating an arrangement that works for all of us while I get established again." The agreement we'd reached, with Richard's guidance, proposed joint legal custody with primary physical placement with me until the end of the school year, transitioning to a more balanced arrangement once Jennifer was fully settled. The plan acknowledged both Tyler's need for stability and the importance of maintaining his relationship with his mother during this transition. "Sullivan custody matter," called the court officer from the doorway, Judge Watkins presiding. We filed into the courtroom, the familiar environment simultaneously comforting and strange to me from this new perspective. For 30 years, I had been the figure behind the bench, the one weighing evidence and making determinations that affected families' lives. Now I sat at the petitioner's table, my role entirely different, yet guided by the same fundamental principle that had defined my judicial career, the pursuit of an outcome that served the best interests of those most vulnerable. Judge Eleanor Watkins entered briskly, her reputation for efficiency and child-centered decisions making her an ideal jurist for our case. She acknowledged me with a slight nod, a professional courtesy between current and former judges, before calling the proceeding to order. "I've reviewed the petition and supporting documentation," she began, scanning the papers before her. "This appears to be a consensual custody arrangement between grandmother and mother, with the minor residing primarily with the grandmother until the end of the current school year. Is that an accurate summary, Counselor?" Richard confirmed the arrangement, explaining the circumstances that had necessitated Tyler's return to Boston and Jennifer's concurrent relocation. "And Ms. Davis?" Judge Watkins turned her attention to Jennifer. "You're in agreement with this arrangement? This is voluntary on your part?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jennifer replied, her voice steady despite her evident nervousness. "I believe it's in Tyler's best interest to maintain his current living arrangement while I establish myself in a new job and apartment. Margaret, Judge Sullivan, has provided stability during a difficult transition." Judge Watkins nodded, making a note before addressing me directly. "Judge Sullivan, while your professional background certainly speaks to your understanding of the legal implications of guardianship, I'd like to hear your perspective on the practical aspects of caring for a teenager at this stage of your life." The question was fair and expected. At 65, I was at an age when many grandparents might hesitate to take on primary caregiving responsibilities for an adolescent. "Tyler has been a regular presence in my home since his father's death 7 years ago," I explained. "Weekend visits, school vacations, summer stays. We've established routines and expectations that make this transition natural rather than disruptive. My schedule as a retired judge allows me considerable flexibility for his activities and needs." Judge Watkins then turned her attention to Tyler, her demeanor softening slightly. "Mr. Sullivan, you're 16, which means the court gives significant weight to your preferences in custody matters. Can you tell me, in your own words, what arrangement you believe is in your best interest at this time?" Tyler sat straighter, his nervousness evident but controlled. "I'd like to continue living with my grandmother while finishing the school year at Boston Latin. I want to spend time with my mom, too, especially now that she's back in Boston. The arrangement they've worked out seems fair to everyone. And you feel safe and supported in both homes?" "Yes," Tyler confirmed without hesitation. "My grandmother's house has always been my second home, and Mom is working hard to make her new apartment a good place for both of us." The judge nodded, making additional notes before addressing the issue that hovered unspoken behind our petition. "The file indicates there's an active restraining order against Jennifer Davis's former partner, Robert Miller, protecting both Ms. Davis and the minor. Has there been any violation of that order since it was issued?" "No, Your Honor," Richard responded. "However, the circumstances that necessitated the order remain relevant to these proceedings, as they speak to the importance of maintaining clear legal parameters regarding Tyler's custody and residence." Judge Watkins reviewed the restraining order documentation, her expression grave. "The court takes allegations of domestic violence very seriously, particularly when they impact a minor. The documented evidence in this case provides additional support for the proposed custody arrangement, as stability and safety are paramount considerations." After a few more clarifying questions about practical logistics, transportation between households, holiday arrangements, communication protocols, Judge Watkins rendered her decision. "The court finds that the proposed custody arrangement serves the best interests of the minor child. Joint legal custody is granted to Jennifer Davis and Margaret Sullivan, with primary physical placement with Margaret Sullivan until June 30th, after which the parties will transition to the shared physical custody schedule detailed in their agreement." She signed the order with a practiced flourish, then looked up to address us directly. "This arrangement balances the minor's need for stability with the importance of maintaining strong relationships with both maternal figures in his life. I commend all parties for putting aside potential conflicts to create a solution centered on the child's well-being. As we exited the courtroom, a palpable sense of relief emanated from our small group. The legal formalization of our arrangement provided not just practical clarity, but emotional security, a framework that acknowledged the reality of our situation while creating space for healing and growth. "That went well," Richard commented as we gathered in the corridor. "Judge Watkins is thorough but fair. The order she signed gives us exactly what we were seeking." Tyler, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout the proceedings, finally allowed his tension to visibly release. "So it's official. I stay with Grandma until the end of school, and then we figure out the next steps?" "That's right," Jennifer confirmed, her expression a complex mixture of sadness and acceptance. "It gives me time to get the apartment properly set up, and you time to finish the semester without more disruption." I watched their interaction with a sense of cautious optimism. The past months had tested our family bonds in unprecedented ways, forcing difficult reckonings and uncomfortable truths into the open. Yet here we stood, having navigated a path forward that prioritized Tyler's needs while allowing Jennifer the space to rebuild her life and reclaim her independence. As we left the courthouse, stepping from the cool institutional interior into the bright spring sunshine, I was struck by how much had changed since that late-night phone call from the Portland police station. The journey from crisis to resolution had been neither straight nor simple, but it had led us to this moment. Imperfect, complex, but fundamentally hopeful. The legal proceedings were complete, the formal structures now in place. But the more challenging work of emotional healing and relationship rebuilding would continue, guided not by court orders and custody agreements, but by the deeper bonds of family that had weathered this storm and emerged perhaps stronger for the testing. Summer arrived with a gentle persistence, transforming Boston's urban landscape with vibrant greenery and longer evenings. 3 months had passed since the custody hearing, bringing changes both subtle and profound to our reconfigured family. Tyler had completed his semester at Boston Latin with academic distinction, his teachers remarking on his focus and resilience despite the mid-year transition. Jennifer had settled into her position at Massachusetts General, her natural aptitude for cardiac nursing providing a renewed sense of professional identity. Her small apartment near the hospital had gradually transformed from a temporary shelter into a home, with weekend visits from Tyler helping to establish new routines and shared spaces. As for me, I had adapted to the day-to-day responsibilities of raising a teenager with a mixture of remembered parenting skills and newly developed patience. The rhythms of our household, morning rushes to school, evening discussions over dinner, weekend excursions to museums and bookstores, had become comfortingly familiar. On this particular June evening, we were preparing for a milestone, the first dinner gathering of our extended family since the custody proceedings. Catherine had flown in from Toronto for a long weekend visit, bringing her academic intensity and dry humor back into our daily interactions. Jennifer would be joining us as well, the first time all 4 of us would share a meal at my house since the crisis that had fractured and then reshaped our family bonds. "Should I put out the good china?" Tyler asked as he helped me prepare the dining room. "It's kind of a special occasion." "The everyday plates are fine," I assured him, touched by his consideration. "This isn't a formal dinner, it's family reconnecting." He nodded, arranging silverware with careful precision. "Do you think Mom will be okay? She seemed nervous when I was at her apartment yesterday." I considered the question thoughtfully. Jennifer's healing process had been neither linear nor simple. The psychological effects of Robert's controlling behavior had surfaced in unexpected ways during therapy. Moments of unwarranted self-doubt, lingering hypervigilance, the slow process of trusting her own judgment again. "I think she's anxious about seeing everyone together," I acknowledged. "Group dynamics can be challenging after individual relationships have shifted, but your mother is stronger than she sometimes believes." Tyler absorbed this with the thoughtful consideration that had become even more pronounced in recent months. At 16 and a half, he stood at the threshold between childhood and adulthood, his experiences having accelerated certain aspects of his maturation while reminding us all of his need for continued support and guidance. "Aunt Catherine isn't going to interrogate her, is she?" he asked, voicing a concern I had privately shared. My daughter's academic analytical approach sometimes manifested as unintentional cross-examination in emotional situations. I've spoken with Catherine, I assured him. She understands that tonight is about reconnection, not rehashing difficult events. The doorbell rang, and Tyler moved to answer it with an eagerness that revealed his underlying hope for this evening, the possibility of his fractured family finding a new equilibrium. Catherine arrived first, bringing her customary energy into the house as she embraced Tyler with genuine warmth before turning to me. "The prodigal daughter returns," she quipped, her academic career having kept her physical presence in our lives more limited than she might have preferred. "Though I'm hardly returning in sackcloth and ashes, just bearing wine and chocolate, I see," I noted, accepting the offerings with a smile, a more practical form of penance. We had just settled in the living room when the doorbell rang again. Tyler jumped up immediately, his enthusiasm transparent as he went to greet his mother. Jennifer entered with visible hesitation, carrying a dish that added her contribution to our meal. The changes in her over recent months were evident, her posture more upright, her clothing chosen with renewed attention to self-expression rather than blending into the background. The tentative smile she offered as she entered the living room spoke volumes about her determination to participate fully in this gathering, despite her understandable anxiety. "The lasagna needs about 15 minutes in the oven," she said, her voice steadier than her expression as she handed me the dish. I remembered it was always Michael's favorite for family dinners. The mention of my son, her former husband, Tyler's father, Catherine's brother, brought a moment of shared remembrance that acknowledged the absence at the core of our reconfigured family. Michael's death had set in motion the series of events that ultimately led to this evening, his loss creating the void that Jennifer had so desperately tried to fill with Robert. "It still is my favorite," Tyler said, breaking the potential melancholy with teenage practicality. "I've been smelling it since you got out of the car." Dinner proceeded with a gradually warming atmosphere, initial awkwardness giving way to more natural conversation as we found our collective rhythm. Catherine shared amusing anecdotes from her university department. Jennifer spoke about her new colleagues and the satisfaction of returning to cardiac care. Tyler recounted his plans for a summer science program at MIT that his counselor had encouraged him to apply for. I observed more than participated, taking quiet satisfaction in the healing evident around my table. As a judge, I had witnessed countless families torn apart by circumstances both within and beyond their control. Now, in my retirement, I was privileged to participate in the careful reconstruction of my own family's bonds, damaged but not destroyed by crisis. After dessert, Catherine helped me clear the table, while Jennifer and Tyler moved to the back porch, their private conversation visible through the window as they sat side by side on the steps, shoulders occasionally touching in unconscious reconnection. "She's doing better than I expected," Catherine noted quietly as we loaded the dishwasher. "When you first told me what happened with that person, I wasn't sure Jennifer would find her way back." "People are remarkably resilient when given the right support," I replied, thinking of the many cases I'd presided over where trauma had ultimately led to transformation. Jennifer needed time and space to rediscover her own strength. Catherine's analytical gaze settled on me, her expression shifting to one of thoughtful assessment. "You know, Mother, when Dad died and you decided to retire from the bench, I worried you might fade into passive widowhood. I should have known better." "What do you mean?" "Look at what you've done in the past 6 months," she said, gesturing toward the porch where Tyler and Jennifer continued their conversation. "You confronted a controlling, potentially dangerous man. You navigated the legal system from the petitioner's side after decades on the bench. You've essentially become the parent of a teenager again at 65. That's not exactly a quiet retirement. I hadn't considered my actions in that light, having responded to circumstances out of necessity rather than conscious choice. I did what was needed. Anyone would have done the same." Catherine's eyebrow raised in familiar skepticism. "No, Mother, they wouldn't have. Many grandmothers might have offered sympathy or temporary shelter, but few would have confronted the entire situation with your level of, well, judicial thoroughness." Before I could respond, the back door opened, and Tyler and Jennifer rejoined us, their expressions suggesting their private conversation had been productive. "Mom's coming to my MIT program presentation next month," Tyler announced with evident satisfaction. "And we're going to try that new hiking trail in the Blue Hills this weekend, if you want to join us, Grandma." "I'd like that," I replied, noting the small but significant shift in their interaction, the careful rebuilding of trust and connection that had begun in these past months. Later that evening, after Jennifer and Catherine had departed and Tyler had retreated to his room, I sat in my study reflecting on the evening's success. On my desk lay the latest update from Captain Reynolds. Robert had resigned from the police department rather than face termination following the completion of the internal investigation. The restraining order remained in effect, and according to Reynolds' sources, he had moved to New Hampshire, putting physical distance between himself and the family he had tried to control. The immediate danger had passed, but its impact remained. In Tyler's occasional hypervigilance, in Jennifer's ongoing therapy sessions, in the new arrangements that governed our family interactions. Yet alongside these lingering effects were signs of growth and renewal that might never have emerged without the catalyst of crisis. My judicial career had taught me that justice rarely manifested as neat resolution. More often, it appeared as a path forward, imperfect but navigable, shaped by truth and compassion rather than fear and control. Our family had found such a path, distinct from the one we would have chosen, but ultimately leading toward healing. As I prepared for bed, my phone lit up with a text from Jennifer. "Thank you for tonight. For everything, really. We're going to be okay, aren't we?" I typed back without hesitation. "Yes, we are. One day at a time." The phrase was simple, but profoundly true. The same wisdom I had offered countless times from the bench now applied to my own family's journey. One day at a time, we would continue building this new configuration of relationships, stronger for having been tested, more authentic for having faced difficult truths. The midnight call that had started this journey had revealed not just a crisis but an opportunity to demonstrate for Tyler the power of standing firm in one's principles, to help Jennifer reclaim her independence, and to remind myself that my judicial identity extended beyond the courtroom into the fundamental values that guided my life. My grandson had called me from a police station, desperate and afraid. What followed had tested all of us. But tonight's dinner had confirmed what I had hoped from the beginning, that family bonds, when grounded in love and respect rather than control and fear, could withstand even the most serious challenges. One day at a time, indeed. Tomorrow would bring its own complexities, but we would face them together, each of us changed by what we had endured. Each of us stronger for having found our way through to the other side.